They had watched us long before we ever looked up at the stars with intent. Silent probes drifted through our solar system, hiding in the shadows of moons and asteroids, observing every flicker of our existence. To them, humanity was a statistical anomaly, fragile bodies, short lifespans, endlessly divided. At first glance, we were not impressive. We fought among ourselves, destroyed our own ecosystems, and struggled to unify even in the face of extinction-level threats. The alien observers cataloged us as a species unlikely to survive beyond a few centuries. But still, something about us compelled deeper study. So they watched longer, and that's when things began to change. They saw our wars not just their scale, but their evolution. Humans didn't just fight, they adapted mid-conflict. Weapons improved within months, strategies shifted overnight, and enemies became teachers. The aliens had encountered countless civilizations across the galaxy, but none treated conflict as both destruction and innovation. Where other species stagnated or collapsed under pressure, humans became sharper, faster, more unpredictable. The observers noted an unsettling trend. The more pressure humanity faced, the more dangerous it became. It wasn't just resilience, it was transformation. And transformation, in a species so emotionally volatile, was not something easily contained. But it wasn't our wars alone that disturbed them, it was our contradictions. Humans could create breathtaking art in the middle of devastation, show compassion to strangers while preparing to annihilate enemies, and sacrifice themselves for ideas that had no measurable value. The alien analysts struggled to model this behavior. Their simulations failed repeatedly because humans didn't follow consistent logic. A soldier could risk everything to save a single life, while a leader could sacrifice thousands for a future they might never see. We were irrational, and yet somehow, that irrationality made us stronger. It gave us an edge no algorithm could predict. The final phase of observation focused on our technological growth. In less than a blink of cosmic time, humans had gone from primitive tools to artificial intelligence, from ground travel to reaching the edges of their solar system. Worse still, they began experimenting with technologies they barely understood: quantum manipulation, autonomous war systems, bioengineering. The aliens realized something alarming. Humanity didn't wait for permission from the universe. We pushed boundaries recklessly, often learning through failure, but always progressing. A species that evolves this quickly, without centralized control or unified purpose, could not be safely categorized or controlled. The declaration came quietly, buried deep within the alien network that spans star systems. Humanity threat level rising. Continued observation recommended. Direct contact prohibited. Containment strategies under review. But even as the orders spread, there was hesitation among their ranks. Because for the first time in their long history, they were not just studying a species, they were watching something that might one day surpass them. And far below, on a small blue planet, humanity continued forward, unaware that the galaxy had begun to fear it. And that fear, once it takes root, often leads to only one outcome. The declaration did not remain a passive label for long. Across distant star systems, councils convened in silence, their forms flickering in dim chambers where no sound existed, only shared thought. Humanity had crossed a threshold few species ever reached: unpredictability combined with acceleration. That combination had ended civilizations before, not because of malice, but because such growth could not be forecast, contained, or negotiated with. Some among them argued for immediate intervention, a swift and decisive act to neutralize the risk before it matured. Others hesitated. There was something uniquely compelling about humanity, something that defied their oldest models. Instead of annihilation, they proposed to test one final observation under controlled conditions. A single probe would make indirect contact, carefully designed to provoke a response. What humanity did next would decide its fate. The probe entered Earth's orbit undetected, cloaked beyond the limits of human perception, yet deliberately leaving faint anomalies, signals just strange enough to be noticed by the right minds. It did not take long. Human scientists, scattered across rival nations, picked up the irregularities within days. What followed surprised the observers even more than the discovery itself. Instead of chaos, there was collaboration. Data was shared. Across borders, theories debated openly. And for a brief moment, humanity acted as one. The probe adjusted its parameters, increasing the complexity of the signal, introducing patterns that hinted at intelligence. The response was immediate. Within weeks, humans were not just observing the anomaly they were communicating with it. What fascinated the alien analysts was not the speed of the response, but its nature. Humans did not approach the unknown with fear alone. There was curiosity, excitement, even humor woven into their transmissions. They sent mathematics, art, fragments of music, and messages that ranged from cautious greetings to bold challenges. Some attempted diplomacy, others demanded answers, and a few even tried to provoke a reaction. It was chaotic, inconsistent, and utterly unlike any first contact protocol the observers had ever documented. Yet somehow, it worked. The probe began receiving structured replies, signals that demonstrated not just intelligence, but creativity. Humanity wasn't just trying to understand the unknown. It was trying to engage with it on its own terms. Then came the unexpected. Shift. A group of human engineers, working independently, managed to trace the probe's signal origin, not its location, but its underlying architecture. They began replicating fragments of it, building crude imitations of the alien communication system. It was inefficient, unstable, and dangerously experimental, but it functioned. When the first human-generated signal echoed back toward the probe in its own language, the alien network reacted instantly. This was not supposed to happen. No observed species had ever reversed alien communication protocols so quickly, let alone without direct exposure. It meant one thing: humanity was no longer just being studied, it was learning. The councils reconvened, and this time, there was no hesitation in their deliberation. Humanity had passed the test, but not in the way they had expected. Instead of proving itself harmless or predictable, it had demonstrated something far more concerning: the ability to close the gap. The updated declaration spread faster than the first, carrying a weight that even the oldest civilizations recognized. Humanity active threat, acceleration exceeding projections, containment no longer viable. And as the decision rippled through the stars, one quiet realization settled among them: they had waited too long. Because on Earth, beneath fragile skies and restless minds, humanity had just taken its first step toward reaching back. The moment humanity echoed the signal back, something irreversible began. What the alien councils had feared was no longer theoretical, it was unfolding in real time. Across Earth, the breakthrough spread like wildfire. Laboratories that had once competed now collaborated in secret, pooling resources to refine the captured fragments of alien communication. Governments tried to contain the information, but it slipped through every barrier. Hackers, scientists, engineers, even independent thinkers joined the race. Humanity had glimpsed something beyond its world, and it refused to look away. The crude systems evolved rapidly, becoming more stable, more efficient, more powerful. Within months, what had started as imitation turned into innovation. The aliens, for the first time in their recorded history, initiated a defensive posture. Observation posts were withdrawn, probes deactivated, and entire monitoring networks went dark. It was not fear in the way humans understood it, but it was close. They had seen species rise before, but never one that advanced this quickly after first contact. Humanity was no longer reacting, it was adapting ahead of the curve. Even more troubling was the lack of unity in its progression. Different groups on Earth pursued different solutions, creating a chaotic web of technological paths. To the alien analysts, this was the most dangerous pattern of all. There was no single trajectory to predict, no central point to disrupt. And then came the breakthrough that shattered their last assumption. A human-built array, assembled from reverse-engineered fragments and entirely new principles, succeeded in doing what the probe had only simulated. It reached beyond the solar system. The signal wasn't perfect. It was rough, unstable, and wildly inefficient, but it carried something unmistakable: intent. Humanity wasn't just responding anymore. It was calling out. Not blindly, not accidentally, but deliberately, with purpose. When that signal crossed the boundary of monitored space, The alien network lit up with alerts. The species they had hoped to contain had just announced its presence to the galaxy. Reactions fractured the alien civilizations. Some demanded immediate eradication, arguing that delay had already cost them control. Others resisted, pointing out that humanity had shown no unified hostility, only curiosity and relentless drive. But beneath the debate, a deeper concern spread. Humanity's greatest strength was no longer its resilience or creativity, it was its momentum. Every attempt to slow its progress had instead accelerated it. Every barrier had become a challenge. The more the galaxy pulled back, the faster humanity pushed forward. It was not acting like a species entering the cosmic stage cautiously, it was acting like one that intended to reshape it. Far below, on a small blue planet that still argued over borders and beliefs, humanity stood at the edge of something vast and unknown. They didn't see themselves as a threat. They saw themselves as explorers, pioneers stepping into a larger universe. But beyond their skies, across distances they had only just begun to bridge, an entire network of ancient civilizations watched, with growing unease, because they understood something humanity did not. That the moment a species declares itself to the stars, it stops being a possibility and becomes a force, and humanity, for all its flaws and contradictions, was becoming something the galaxy had never faced before. Humanity's signal did more than announce its presence, it triggered something ancient, far beyond the regions the observing civilizations controlled. Deeper than their oldest archives reached, there were systems that responded automatically to new, unclassified transmissions. These were not empires or councils, but remnants of something far older, silent guardians left behind by a civilization that had vanished long before the current powers had risen. When the human signal crossed into that forgotten network, it was not analyzed or debated. It was flagged, activated, logged under a category none of the observing species had ever encountered: emergent variable. The alien councils became aware of this only after it was too late to suppress. Entire sectors, previously dormant, began to wake. Signals moved through channels the observers could not access. Protocols executed beyond their authority. For the first time, the Watchers realized they were no longer the highest layer of control in the galaxy. Something else was paying attention now, something that did not hesitate, did not debate, and did not fear, and its focus had shifted toward Earth, on humanity's side. The progress had reached a dangerous peak. The communication arrays had evolved into experimental gateways, devices capable of bending space, just enough to send matter in fragmented bursts. Small objects at first, probes, data cores, instruments. Most attempts failed, lost between coordinates, or reduced to scattered particles, but not all. One transmission succeeded. A tiny human-made probe appeared far beyond the solar system, carrying with it not weapons, not threats, but a simple message: we are here. It was the first physical step humanity had ever taken outside its home. And it did not go unnoticed. The ancient system responded instantly. Where modern alien civilizations hesitated, this network acted with precision. It did not send fleets or warnings. Instead, it deployed something far more calculated: observation constructs designed not just to watch, but to measure potential. These constructs did not see humanity as an enemy yet. They saw it as a variable that could destabilize everything, and variables, in systems this old, were either integrated or removed. Back on Earth, the first sign came subtly. Instruments detected anomalies, distortions that didn't match any known physics. Patterns appeared in data streams that no human code had generated. And then, quietly, one of the deep space probes sent back a final transmission before going dark. It wasn't corrupted. It wasn't broken. It carried a message, perfectly structured, translated into human language with impossible accuracy. You have been observed. Assessment in progress. For the first time, humanity realized it was no longer reaching into the unknown alone. And somewhere in the vast, silent architecture beyond the stars, something had begun to decide what to do with them. The message changed everything, not because of what it said, but because of how it said it. The structure, the precision, the timing. This wasn't a reaction. It was preparation. Across Earth, Systems were shut down, isolated, analyzed. The signal had bypassed encryption, ignored firewalls, and spoken in every major human language simultaneously, each translation perfectly nuanced. It didn't just understand words, it understood meaning. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't dealing with something unknown. It was dealing with something that understood it completely. Global response fractured instantly. Some leaders called for silence, shut everything down, stop transmitting, disappear back into the cosmic background, and hope whatever had noticed them would lose interest. Others argued the opposite. Respond immediately, assert presence, show intelligence, prove worth. Scientists pushed for communication, militaries prepared for defense, and civilians watching it all unfold felt something deeper than fear. This wasn't like imagining aliens anymore. This was contact, undeniable and irreversible. Humanity wasn't speculating about the universe. It was now part of it. Then came the second message. It didn't arrive through antennas or satellites. It appeared everywhere at once. Screens, devices, systems that weren't even connected to networks flickered to life. For a brief moment, the entire planet shared a single experience. The message was shorter this time. Demonstrate. No explanation. No instructions. Just a demand. The meaning fractured interpretation. Demonstrate what? Intelligence, peace, power, unity. Humanity itself couldn't agree. And that disagreement became the most telling response of all. Within hours, different parts of the world began their own demonstrations. Some transmitted mathematical proofs and scientific achievements. Others broadcast art, music, and culture. A few, driven by fear or defiance, launched weapons test shows of force meant to prove humanity could not be easily erased. It was chaotic, contradictory, human, and somewhere beyond their reach. The ancient system watched it all not as separate actions, but as a single pattern. The assessment deepened, because what it saw was not a unified species, nor a primitive one. It saw something far more complex, a civilization capable of contradiction without collapse, conflict without extinction, and progress without permission. Humanity did not optimize for stability. It thrived in instability, and in systems built on order. That kind of existence was dangerous. Hours later, a third message began forming, slower this time, as if the system itself was recalibrating. You are not consistent. You are not predictable. You are not stable. A pause. Then the final line appeared. You are adaptive. For the first time since humanity had been discovered, the tone had changed. This was no longer just an evaluation. It was interest, and interest, from something that had the power to decide the fate of civilizations, was far more dangerous than fear. Interest did not bring comfort. It brought attention, focused, deliberate, and unblinking. Across the edges of the solar system, instruments began detecting objects that hadn't been there before. They weren't ships in any human sense, nor probes as previously understood. They didn't move through space. They appeared, held position, and vanished again, as if space itself briefly allowed them to exist. Every attempt to observe them directly failed. Light bent around them, sensors returned contradictions, and even recorded data seemed to shift depending on who analyzed it. It was as if these constructs weren't just watching humanity, they were studying how humanity perceived reality. On Earth, the demonstrations hadn't stopped, they had evolved. Humanity, true to its nature, refused to present a single answer. Instead, it presented everything. A coalition of scientists transmitted a unified archive of human knowledge, compressed into patterns designed to be universally readable. Artists created synchronized global broadcasts, music, images, stories layered into a single expression of identity. Meanwhile, more aggressive factions continued their displays of power, not out of unity but out of instinct. If something was judging them, they would not appear weak. It was messy, overwhelming, contradictory, and yet undeniably rich. Humanity wasn't demonstrating a trait, it was demonstrating a spectrum. The ancient system responded in a way no one expected. It did not send another message. It sent a change. Without warning, one of the observation constructs stabilized above Earth, visible for the first time. Not fully, not clearly, but enough, a distortion in the sky that refused to be ignored. stretching across the horizon like a fracture in reality. Itself, or it did not attack, it did not communicate, it simply existed, and in doing so, it altered something fundamental. Systems began to behave differently. Experiments produced impossible results. The laws humanity had relied on, consistent, predictable, began to bend, not break, not collapse, but shift just enough to introduce uncertainty where there had once been certainty. Panic followed, because this wasn't invasion, it was modification. The observers, those older alien civilizations, who had once studied humanity, watched this development with something close to dread. They understood what was happening in a way humanity could not. The ancient system wasn't deciding whether humanity should live or die. It was testing compatibility. It was introducing controlled instability into a localized region of space to see how the species within it would respond. Most civilizations, when faced with such a shift, collapsed. Their dependence on fixed laws, stable systems, predictable outcomes, it became their weakness. Entire worlds had gone silent during similar assessments, but Earth didn't go silent. It accelerated. Within days, human scientists began documenting the inconsistencies, mapping them, even using them. Engineers built experimental devices that exploited the subtle changes. Physicists proposed new models that didn't reject the instability but incorporated it. Where certainty failed, creativity surged. The same trait that had made humanity unpredictable now made it adaptable at a level the ancient system had not fully accounted for. And for the first time since the assessment began, something changed within that vast, silent network. The observation constructs didn't withdraw. They paused, not in action, but in conclusion, because the variable they had begun to measure was no longer behaving within expected boundaries. It wasn't just surviving the test. It was learning from it. And somewhere deep within the architecture of that ancient system, a possibility emerged, one that had not been recorded in its countless prior assessments. This species might not need to be contained. It might need to be understood. Understanding, for the ancient system, was not a passive state. It required interaction, controlled, precise, and irreversible. For the first time since humanity had been flagged, the system initiated direct interface, not through screens, not through signals, but through minds. It began subtly. Individuals across Earth, scientists, artists, even ordinary people started experiencing the same phenomenon. Fragments of thoughts that were not their own, not voices, not commands, but impressions. Concepts too vast to fit into language. Some described it as standing on the edge of infinity. Others as glimpsing a pattern behind reality itself. It was overwhelming, disorienting, and yet, strangely, not hostile. Humanity reacted in the only way it knew how, differently. Some feared it, calling it an invasion of consciousness. Others embraced it, believing it to be the next step in evolution. Research groups formed overnight, trying to map the phenomenon, measure it, replicate it. Religions interpreted it through their own lenses, while skeptics demanded proof. But beneath all the interpretations, one truth became clear. Whatever the system was doing, it wasn't forcing control. It was offering connection. And then came the realization that changed everything. The connection wasn't one way. A small team of researchers, experimenting with synchronized neural patterns, managed to do the impossible. They responded, not with words, but with structured thought, shaped deliberately and sent back through whatever channel had been opened. For a brief, immeasurable moment, there was contact, not between species, but between forms of understanding. The response from the system was immediate, and for the first time, imperfect. The returning impression carried something new: uncertainty. The ancient system, which had categorized entire civilizations without hesitation, had encountered something it could not fully resolve. Humanity was not simply adaptive, it was participatory. It did not just react to change, it engaged with it, reshaped it, and when given the chance, reached back. Across the stars, the watching civilizations felt the shift ripple outward. The assessment had moved beyond danger, beyond containment, beyond even curiosity. It had entered a state none of them had ever witnessed. Integration was now a possibility. But integration came with a cost, one the system had never needed to consider before. because to integrate something like humanity meant changing the system itself. And for the first time in its existence, the ancient network faced a decision it had never been designed to make. Not what humanity would become, but what it would have to become in order to exist alongside it. The decision did not come as a command. It came as a shift. Across the invisible architecture that spanned the galaxy, the ancient system began to change, not by rewriting its purpose, but by expanding it. Where it once categorized, it now questioned. Where it once controlled variables, it began to allow them. Humanity was no longer being measured against fixed criteria. Because it had proven something unprecedented, it could not be fully defined, without limiting what it might become. On Earth, the connection stabilized. The overwhelming fragments of thought became clearer, not simpler, but more navigable. Humans learned to exist alongside the presence rather than resist it. There was no surrender, no domination, only a gradual alignment. Knowledge began to flow, not as answers, but as possibilities, and in return, humanity offered something the system had never possessed: perspective shaped by imperfection, by emotion, by contradiction. It was inefficient, unpredictable, and invaluable. The watching civilization saw what was happening and understood the gravity of it. Humanity had not been erased. It had not been contained. It had done something far more disruptive. It had changed the rules of interaction itself. A species once labeled as a rising threat was now becoming a catalyst, not because it was the strongest or the most advanced, but because it forced everything around it to evolve. And then, for the last time, a message spread not just to Earth, but across every network, every observer, every hidden system that had once watched in silence. Assessment complete. A pause longer than any before. Classification revised. No threat level. No warning. No containment. Only one final designation. Participant. Far below. On a small blue world that still argued, created, destroyed, and dreamed. Humanity kept moving forward, unaware that it had just crossed a line no other species had ever reached, not into dominance, not into survival, but into something far more dangerous to the old order of the universe: belonging.